Hi, everybody. My name is Carl Darden, and I'd like to welcome and thank all of you for joining us today on Navy Sports Central. I'm your host, and this is the official podcast of the Navy Sports Nation, where we take a deeper dive into Navy sports. In this episode, we're going to get into a topic that's been getting more attention in recent years, and that is the mental game as it relates to athletic competition. I have a terrific guest today who will help educate us on exactly what that is and how athletes can further develop it. And finally, he'll help us see how these techniques can help Navy athletes both on and off the field of competition. So, I hope that's gotten you curious enough to stick around. We'll be right back to kick things off. All right, it's great to have you with us, whether you are a returning listener or hearing us for the first time. Thanks for making us part of your day. I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the sports update here because I definitely want to get to our main topic in the deep dive segment. We're going to cover three sports here. I'm going to start off with wrestling, then we're going to get to baseball and also Navy women's golf. So as you all know, Navy sent 5 wrestlers to the NCAA championships in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They were Brendan Ferretti at 133 pounds, Josh Cotterhunt at 141, David Key at 184, Jacob Kozer at 197, and finally Grady Grease at 285. Of those 5, Key, Kozer, and Grease made it to the second day, but all 3 of them could not advance past the second consolation round, although they put up a really good fight. Both Key and Kozer extended their opponents to overtime in their last matches, while Grease lost a very tight contest 4-1 to the 16th ranked wrestler in the country. So I guess if you're looking at how things wrapped up in 2023, Key ends his junior year with a career-high 20 wins, 5 of which came against nationally ranked wrestlers. Kozer ends his career at Navy with an overall record of 80-35, and he is the first mid to reach 80 victories since Nick Gill did that back in 2018. He was Navy's team captain this year and posted a 27-12 dual record and defeated 10 nationally ranked wrestlers over the course of his 4-year career. He also won 4 tournament championships and placed 7th in his respective weight class at the 2022 Cliff Keen Las Vegas Invitational. And then finally, Key finished with a 4-2 record in his career against Army, winning 3 of his 4 star matches. Grease, who is a junior, finished out the year as Navy's leader in total wins with 32 and dual wins with 9. And he became the 50th wrestler in Navy history to reach 30 victories in a season, and the first mid to achieve that mark since Michael Coleman and Nick Gill accomplished that feat 5 years ago back in 2018. Highlights to Grease's year include tournament titles at the Clarion Open, the Bearcat Open, and the Franklin and Marshall Open, and he also won Navy's 99th individual EIWA title when he took home the heavyweight championship about a month ago. Finally, Grease finished out the season with a team leading 8 wins against nationally ranked opponents, and 3 of those did come in his EIWA title run. All right, now let's move on to baseball. We haven't talked much about that sport since the Mids started their year. Prior to the Patriot League schedule getting underway, which actually just happened this past week, Navy did square off against Air Force a little over, I think it's probably back in February. Yeah, so about a month ago. And that series is called the Freedom Classic, and Navy ended up winning that 2-1. In fact, they swept the first 2 games and then just played the third game, which Air Force ended up winning. But now the team is into their Patriot League schedule, and they just got things kicked off with a 4-game series against Bucknell, and they split that series, so right now they are 2-2. I'm just going to go ahead and highlight a couple of Navy's leading hitters right now. The first is junior Hudson Leonards, and he is hitting .375 right now with an OPS of .943. And then right behind him is Brock Murtha, who is a freshman, hitting .324, and his OPS is .843. And by the way, the RBI leader is Logan Keller. He is a junior, and he's currently leading the team with 15. The Mids have 4 games coming up at home this weekend, 2 with Lehigh and 2 with Lafayette. And then they get to play UMBC on March the 29th at Camden Yards, so that ought to be pretty cool. And finally, I've got some good news to pass along about the Navy women's golf team. They competed in the Red Rocks Invitational in Sedona, Arizona this past weekend. Sedona is about 3 hours north of where I am. It was hosted by Northern Arizona University, and the Mids entered the final round of the tournament in 4th place, but they got a terrific performance from freshman Haley Briscoe. She shot a team low of even par, 216 across the 3 rounds, and she finished 4 strokes behind the eventual winner of the tournament, Elena Slater, who was from Northern Arizona. Anyway, Briscoe shot a 200 par 70 on the last day to post a 5th place finish overall. Right behind her was junior Maria Hurdle, and she played some really consistent golf over the entire weekend. She started off the tournament by shooting a 76, but then quickly followed that up with a 74 on Saturday before coming through for the Mids with the other under par score on Sunday, which was also a 70. That was good enough to allow Hurdle to finish in 11th place overall. So it was a really terrific result for the team as they continue to build momentum for the Patriot League Championships. They are back at home this weekend to take on Delaware in the Battle of the Bay. All right, that'll do it for our sports update. And next we have our Ask Me Anything segment. Once again, we just have one question in the hopper this week. And part of that's my fault. I need to do a better job of getting the word out the Monday before the podcast is released. But anyway, our question does come from W.T. Doerr once again. And here it is. He says that Navy just started their spring practices this week. With the departure of John Marshall, who do you think will emerge as the Mid's biggest playmaker on defense? So once again, Mr. Doerr, thank you for the question. I gave this a little bit of thought based on what I saw from last year, and I did go back and review some of the stats from the 2022 season. But after looking at everything, I'm going to go with Colin Ramos, who will be a rising junior. He started all 12 games last season as a sophomore at the will linebacker position, and he was second on the team in tackles with 76. Ramos also came up with an interception, forced 2 fumbles, which is tied for first, and recovered another one. So the one sense that I got was this guy is always around the football, and he does seem to be a perfect fit for Coach Newberry's scheme. So that's the guy I'm looking at. I think that he's going to be a pretty big impact player, as long as he stays healthy, obviously. And I'm looking forward to seeing who else steps up with him once the season starts. All right, I tell you what, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break right now and come back with our deep dive segment, so stick around. All right, in today's deep dive segment, we're going to explore an area that's been around since athletes have been competing, and that is the inner or mental game. My guest today is David Levin. He is the author of Raise Your Inner Game and also the founder of the Raise Your Inner Game Sports Academy. David helps high school and college athletes develop more confidence, resilience, and mental focus so they can play at a higher level and be happier and more successful in all areas of their lives. I wanted to have David on the podcast to give us his perspective on the inner game, and that way we can get a better handle on what the athletes at the Naval Academy have to manage in order to be successful on the field of competition. David, thank you so much for joining me today on Navy Sports Central. Really glad to have you with us, and I'm definitely looking forward to having a conversation on a topic that is getting a lot more attention these days, and that is how athletes manage and improve their mental game as opposed to their physical game.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
All right. So I got to ask you here, I was reading through your profile, and your bio mentions that you got your start professionally as a singer and a songwriter. And now you are the founder of the Raise Your Inner Game Sports Academy. So kind of a quantum leap there when it comes to, one topic versus another. So I was wondering if you can kind of give us some background there on how that happened.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. It is a kind of a strange path. At least it looks like it. So I think the sort of the short version or the root explanation is that the arc has to do with wanting to share a message. I've been into personal development stuff all my life, like even back in like junior high. I was sort of a new age kid before it was called that, just really into all that stuff. For my work, music's always been my first love from when I was like in grade school. It's all I did, all I wanted to do for a really long time. But as I got older and more into writing songs, I was also wanting to talk about these personal development topics that were important to me. But it turns out that the topic is not that great for songs, or at least it wasn't for me. I have some songs back from that period where I can tell I'm trying to talk about some of these things and it's just not good. Mm-hmm. So anyway, at some point, I split off from that. I mean, I kept doing music, but I started having this kind of parallel work life where I was more onto the information side of things, books, speaking, training programs, stuff like that. And so the book, Raise Your Inner Game, which is really based on all of this self-improvement stuff I've been experiencing myself and developing over all the years. That came out in 2016. It was not written with sports in mind, because again, that wasn't really my background, my experience, wasn't really who I thought I was speaking to. But over the years since the book came out, I discovered first that the material, it turns out, landed really well with teenagers, which was a great surprise. And also kind of got the message that teenage athletes were especially interested in boosting their mental game. It was just a top issue for them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I ended up with the Sports Academy. As I said, it's been a bit of a long road, but that's the general arc of it.
Okay. All right. Very good. So, my first experience when it came to this sort of thing, I mean, I wasn't a varsity athlete in college. I was in high school, but I didn't really think about it too much. I think that my first exposure to this really was when I was actually in the Navy and I was just playing a lot of tennis, just recreationally mostly. I'd play I was probably considered, I don't know if you're into tennis ratings, but at my very best, I was probably about a 3.5 to 4.0 player, which basically meant I was slightly above average, but never did end up winning a tournament or anything. Anyway, I read this book, and it was written by Timothy Galway back in 1974, and it was called The Inner Game of Tennis. And he speaks a lot about the mental side of the game, and not only that, but how he, according to him, you could actually apply his concepts to every aspect of our lives, basically. And a lot of it has to do with like relaxed concentration, that sort of thing. So, first of all, were you familiar with this book? And if so, did it play any role in, your decision to make this transition?
I'm super familiar with the book. I actually read it when it came out. I was at like junior high age in 74.
Mm-hmm.
Also kind of interesting to me, the term inner game that we all just use is just like Band-Aid now, right? We didn't know the term. That's where it came from. It was the title of his book.
Right.
But it was such a big gap, between 74 and 2016. It wasn't a direct inspiration to writing the book for me, but it was foundational. It was in those years, my tween and teen years, like I say, where this personal development, sort of the mindfulness side. I mean, his book's very much of the mindfulness world.
Mm-hmm.
Those are some of the foundational pieces. And I actually reference it a couple places in my book. Again, like you say, kind of the foundational, just the whole topic back then. But even more specifically, the story he tells in that book, that what clicked him into it in the first place, what clicked him into the work he ended up doing, the observations he ended up making about the mental game. It's a classic story, and it's related to the story that clicked me into sort of seeing how it really works. So his story, I'm sure you remember, but for your readers might not have read it. He was a tennis coach, and he was observing his players after something went wrong, beating themselves up, doing the things we do. Gosh, what's wrong with you? Why are you such an idiot? Why can't, all that stuff we do.
Right.
And all of a sudden, he had this epiphany where he said, wait, who are they talking to? Right? They're talking to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But when you really observe, there's a conversation going on in there. There's two people having that conversation inside them.
Right.
And that was the core observation that unlocked everything else. And my experience that I talk about in the book that unlocked it for me and changed the arc of my life was the same. It wasn't the specific that he had, but the observation was the same. Oh, there's somebody else inside me that's working against me. And that's where I need to focus my attention to get control of my inner game. So a hugely influential in a lot of ways, but not, a direct cause and effect for writing the book.
Okay. All right, cool. So let's kind of get into that a little bit. What's your typical age range of athlete that you work with? Is it high school, college, or about a 50-50 split?
Mostly it's younger. Yeah, so far.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even say for sure if I've had, I think the oldest I've worked with, currently working with, and recently it's been like 18.
Okay.
It's actually been really weird. There's been a lot of work on the younger side. I just finished up a program with a girl who turned 13 this month.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm continually, honestly surprised at how effective the material is with kids that young. I just wouldn't have imagined it.
Yeah. That's a good point. Now, when you're talking about that age group in particular, what are some of the common things you've been asked to help these young athletes deal with or overcome, whether it's themselves coming to you or their parents saying, hey, can you help us out here? That sort of thing.
Yeah. And actually, that's a great question. It's interesting because it's the same across all ages.
Mm-hmm.
There's like three sort of main areas. One is confidence, which really shows up like, they're great in practice. They love the sport. But when it comes to game day or tryouts or some kind of pressure, they sort of melt.
Mm-hmm.
especially like against a strong opponent, things like that. They just under pressure, they just don't perform as well as they could. And there's a lot of anxiety around that. Another is resilience. So, maybe they get to game day and they're doing fine, but something goes wrong. They get a bad call, whatever it is, and they get really upset and they can't shake that, and it hurts their play from then on.
Mm-hmm.
And the third realm is what I think of as mental focus. So they know what they need to do. They know they need to stay focused, but for whatever reason, they get distracted, and they're just not as focused and present as they need to be, and it hurts their performance. And so those are the specific areas, and sort of the umbrella above all that is just sort of the general stress and anxiety from the pressure. Another real common thing I'll ask kids about, and they're super clear about, is they have fun in practice. They love the game. They don't have fun in competition.
Oh, okay.
And one of the things we even have them aspire to kind of get them motivated is to say, just imagine the difference it would make in your play and your experience if you could bring that kind of fun you still have in practice to game day. And they all go, oh God, that would be huge.
Right.
So
yeah,
that's the family of things that pretty much universally people want to address.
Yeah, those are all good points. And I know that when I was working with my son, Ethan, playing basketball, I was always trying to teach him to just have a short memory. So that kind of addressed the whole resilience piece of it. Something bad happened, just forget about it and move on. Because I know that's one of the things I struggled with when I was playing competitive sports. So in my last episode, I was talking with a woman, her name is Cynthia Lisa, and she is a Naval Academy graduate from the class of 2000 who played women's lacrosse, and she's a coach now. She's been coaching for like 17 years. And one of the things we got to talking about was this whole notion of kids growing up playing one sport and sticking with it early, or playing multiple sports, at least up until high school. And she made a really interesting point that I agreed with when it came to when kids should start focusing on one sport. And that was, hey, there's plenty of time to do that in high school, right? And she highly recommended that kids played at least two sports up until then, just because it will eventually make them better at the sport they decide to concentrate on once they get into high school. For a couple of different reasons. Some of them physically, because you use different muscles and that sort of thing. But a lot of it had to do with just awareness, just being able to recognize different competitive situations. There's a lot of crossover in certain sports. Like, for instance, basketball and lacrosse have a lot of similarity. So, that sort of thing. But it was mostly from an IQ aspect. And I was wondering, how much of that do you get into when it comes to the conversations you have with athletes and their parents?
Yeah, it is actually a really important subject, and we don't actually talk about that in the conversations I have with the parents, because by the time they come to me, they're focused on the specific things we talked about, right? The resilience, the focus, the confidence, and they're focused on a particular sport. They're not really asking me for larger, life balance sort of stuff. But at the same time, I do hear a lot about it. Just like you say, keeping some variety, playing different sports. Specifically for a couple of things I didn't hear you mention, though I'm guessing you might have touched on it, which is injuries. Injuries are way more common now than they used to be. And from the people I've heard from and talked to, a big part of that is the same sport all the time, same muscles, same movements. They're just burning themselves out.
Right.
Repetitive injuries, stuff like that. But another thing that I have talked about, I actually had a recent podcast about this. It's important just emotionally to have a life outside of sports. Even, like you say, and I agree with this, as they get into high school, certainly going beyond that, maybe it makes sense to, focus on a single sport. But even when that's the case, you need to have also a life outside of sports, because no matter how successful they end up being, their sports life is always going to be just a small part of their total life, and it's going to end sooner than later. And the more you get identified with any one thing, it's just harder to make that transition,
Right.
So again, it's not a topic that comes up in my conversation with parents, but I totally agree. It's super important to have as much of a balance as you can.
Right. Okay. So I've been following sports since basically I was, 8 years old on some level. And I know that certainly in the last, we'll call it 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot of increased focus on the mental aspect of sports, the whole mental health thing. And there have been some pretty prominent athletes who have spoken about it. Michael Phelps is, one that comes to mind, and there have been others. And I definitely agree that this is something that needs to be front and center for people to understand a little bit better. But what do you think has been mainly responsible for that? So, in the last 10 or 15 years, this topic has come more to the forefront. What do you think is the main reason that has happened?
Yeah, I'm just putting my opinion on there, but my sense is that, it's nothing about the sports themselves, nothing about the organization around it. It's really about people's perception around mental health.
Mm-hmm.
I assume the mental struggles and difficulties athletes face have always been there, right? Always been super intense and difficult, and even to some cases harmful. I just think we're a lot more open to hearing about that now, taking it seriously. And again, it's, the athletes being willing to speak up.
Yeah.
But even that comes from, there's some sort of threshold that's changed where they're like, I'm not going to lose my spot on the team. If I do it, I'm not going to, it's not going to really damage my career. And I care about other athletes, and it's so ubiquitous. I mean, again, I'm working with kids generally who aren't at the level where it gets crazy.
Right.
And it's still pretty crazy. I mean, it's especially I think with the teens, because it's hard enough being a teenager just on its own.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on that's hard to sort out. And then to add to that, the many aspects of demands and expectations and pressures as being an athlete, it's a lot, man.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just super great in my mind, just super great that we're addressing it and making it okay to talk about it and trying to, optimize it. Because the point of the point of wanting our kids in sports is because it's good for them physically, it's good for them emotionally. Learn a ton of stuff that they're not going to learn anywhere else. Valuable life lessons and skills. And when the pressure's too much, they don't keep going. Yeah. I mean, it's no fun to do it in the first place.
Right.
And they don't get the lessons they could otherwise get. So the more we can, optimize and continue to improve the whole sort of world of it, it's just good in every way.
Yeah. 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 I totally agree with that. And kind of going back to what you're saying about what the kids have to deal with and stuff like that, as, certainly junior high kids and so forth. I just wanted to relate a quick story from when my son Ethan was playing basketball. And I touched on this in our last episode, so I'm not going to go into the same amount of detail. But long story short, there was a stretch there where we moved Ethan from playing recreational basketball to a club team. And that lasted about a year. This was probably when he was about between 9 and 10 years old. And I decided, along with one of the other dads, that it just was not worth it because the level of intensity and pressure was just crazy. I mean, you had coaches yelling their heads off at 9 and 10-year-old kids, parents that should have just been embarrassed by their behavior. And in the end, I basically took Ethan out of that whole environment and put him back in the rec leagues with another good friend of ours. And he went on to thrive and did really well in high school and so forth. So I can definitely see what you're talking about because you're right. Kids these days have it tough enough. They don't need that. They don't need that added unnecessary type of pressure that gets thrown into the mix because that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially at that age. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean,
for sure.
Yeah.
Now
it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's a game. Uh-huh. we do it because we love it.
Really.
And, as kids develop, tween years, teen years, what motivates them changes. You can leverage that sense of, fun in a sense to motivate them to push themselves and to greater levels of accomplishment. But I don't know. I just, even I know high school can be super serious too.
Yeah.
And some kids are there and it's really their path forward, and other kids are there. It's just kind of fun to do. But it just seems to me that the more you can keep the fun there, the better it's going to work for everything. I'm not a coach. I don't have that experience. I might be just talking, blowing smoke, but that's just my intuition about it. I don't understand how it would not be that.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. Because when Cynthia and I were speaking on the last episode, she spoke a lot to the environment that she tries to create even at her club level, because she was involved in, rec and club and also in high school as well. So she felt that that was a very important part of the game. Now, understanding that, yes, once you get to a certain level, as you pointed out, it's all about being competitive and, things start to matter. But at the same time, I just think, and you can see it even now in the, the college basketball tournaments that are going on, the men's and women's side, how the teams that seem like they're doing the best are the ones that seem like they're having the most fun out there. And
that's so true.
And I'll tell you the other side of it. And I just saw this yesterday. This has nothing to do with Navy or anything like that. But the NCAA Wrestling Championships just concluded yesterday. They were held in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Navy sent like 5 wrestlers there, and 3 of them made it to the second day of competition. But this is a story about a wrestler from Iowa. It was a semifinal match, and his opponent was a wrestler from Purdue. The kid from Iowa had won 3 straight national championships at 125 pounds. I mean, he was the guy, and he was undefeated this year. The guy going against him was the number 4 seed, and during this match, going into they basically have 3 rounds. It goes 3 minutes, 2 minutes, and 2 minutes. And they don't get a lot of a break in between either. I mean, it's like 30 seconds or whatever. But going into the last round, the kid from Iowa was ahead with about a minute to go. He was ahead 7-5. And it looked like, all he basically had to do, as long as he didn't get hit with a stall warning, was to control the match the rest of the way. And he was going to be, advancing to the finals, because this is a semifinal match. And I don't know what happened. I mean, I'm not a wrestling expert or anything like that, but I'm like watching these guys on the mat, and then something just happened. And next thing you know, the kid who was losing got the advantage. He got a takedown, and he ended up pinning the guy with like with about 2 seconds left. He pinned the guy to upset him. He advanced to the finals. And it was just a colossal upset in wrestling terms anyway. And, the thing that made me sad was, as soon as that happened, the cameras didn't go to the parents of the kid who won. All right. They focused on the parent of the kid who lost. And primarily, I guess that was because, he was undefeated and all this kind of stuff. And there was potential history to be made if he could have gotten through that match. But it just made me sad, because what I saw was the woman, she realized what was happening. They were just kind of focusing on her face, and she had a friend that was there with her. And she realized what just happened, and she's like going, "Oh my God." And then when she saw that her son had gotten pinned, she started crying, understandably. But then she like grabbed her glasses off of her face and broke them and slammed them down on the floor. And I was like going, whoa. First of all, I wish the cameras had not stayed with her that long. And secondly, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I hope this doesn't become the moment that defines this young athlete, because sure, it's very disappointing, but he's won 3 national championships already, and he's got the talent to compete at the Olympic level. So here's where you need to have that short memory. Learn whatever lessons you can, but most importantly, don't let it take away from your love of the sport.
Yeah. It's again, it's such an important point. I'm just thinking about this as you're talking. Like the kids I work with. You made the comment, the teams that seem to really be doing the best are the ones who seem to be having the most fun. The kids I work with, the biggest thing they'll take home at the end of it is, I'm having way more fun now. And so it occurred to me that, even as we say, yes, as you go farther up, it gets more serious. It's about winning. It's about peak performance. As a coach, as a parent supporting that, you can still keep the fun as sort of your benchmark. When they're younger, the whole point is fun, right? Getting them into it, keeping them going. As it gets more serious, the point gets to be performance, and especially at the pro levels. But the marker of peak performance is, are they having fun? Are they able to bring that sense of presence and play and energy and life to it? It's not the goal anymore, but it's a marker.
Right.
And it's something to still strive for, as sort of just evidence that they've got their mental game dialed in and they're able to bring their best to it.
Right. Okay, so let's just talk about that a little bit in terms of the types of techniques that you use with these kids to help them sharpen that mental game, and maybe even pass along some tips to coaches and parents who are managing these kids day to day.
The thing that we do, the thing that we help kids, and it ties back to the inner game of tennis we talked about. There's kind of 2 pieces to it, and the book is in 2 sections, and our training program is in 2 phases. Phase 1 is to help the athlete have that same sort of insight that Galway talks about in his book. Basically, there are 2 people in there. There's me, and there's that other one that's saying all that stuff and doing all those things that are standing in my way of being my best in any given moment.
Mm-hmm.
So the classic example is just the negative voice in your head, right? You're like, again, we'll go back to Galway because we talked about it. The kids beating themselves up. Maybe they're doing it silently. In his case, they were saying it out loud, but there's this shame and this judgment going on internally in their head. To have the aha moment where you realize that's not all me. There's the me. Well, my dad said this to me when I was a teenager, early teenager. He said, if you want to know who you are, you're the one who hears the voice in your head.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just as clear as it could have been. So to just step back in that moment when you're beating yourself up and say, well, I'm not beating myself up. Something else inside me is beating me up. And I'm hearing that. And again, that's the Galway insight. Same thing I had in my own life earlier. So the whole first part of the book, the whole first part of the training is doing exercises with them and helping them sort of just observe, slow the tape down in these moments in their head and say, oh, okay, I see that now. I absolutely see that there's me and there's this other thing. By the way, it's not just the voice. There's the thoughts and there's emotions that come up and there's physical things. You're hungry, you're tired, whatever. There's all kinds of these there's these 3 realms that sort of come up and exert control over us or exert a pull on us. So once we get that clear and they really see it, then part 2 is, okay, now that you see how your mental game's working, here are some specific skills you can use to get control of it. And they're kind of, when you just hear them without first going through the conversations about how your mental game works, they can almost sound kind of too simplistic. It's like, really, that's the whole thing? But they're just incredibly, insanely powerful. So I'll just give you one. With the framework of the voice, okay, we're going to be in that realm, the intellectual realm. So you get to the point where you, like I say, you totally see the truth that, I'll frame it this way. If you ever practice some sort of sitting meditation, some kind of mindfulness meditation. And so the goal is you're going to quiet your thoughts. So you sit down and you go say, okay, quiet now. I'm not going to think about anything. And after a couple of seconds, a thought comes up. And
that's me.
And that's everybody. That's how it works. And then you go, oh, nope, not going to think about that. Going to get quiet again. And a couple seconds later, another thought comes up. Well, that is the perfect illustration of what we're talking about. There is a space that exists when you're not thinking. That's you. And the thoughts come from somewhere. You're not initiating them. They arise in your mind. That's all we're talking about. So they totally get that. And then the skill is continuing sort of with the metaphor, there's somebody else there. You sort of pretend it literally is another person saying that to you, and you turn to them and say, nope, quiet. I mean, the skill is actually called, in the book, it's called no quiet. Because that's what you do. You learn to observe when the thoughts arise and you say no, or, whatever version that you want. Shut up, cut it out, get off of me, whatever it is. That's the foundational skill. And just this week, I had 2 students I've been working with talk about how profoundly helpful that is in the moment during competition. So they're coming up, the game hasn't started yet. They're nervous. They're hearing all the stuff. And rather than get into that whole debate and the visualization and all that, they just say, no, cut it out. They can just shut it down and they come back and it actually works. So
neat.
Those are the kind of things. It really, again, just to recap, it's really predicated on them having that first observation that there's 2 of you in there be so real that it's not just a concept or idea. It's like, oh, I recognize it. I've seen it. It happens all the time. It is the truth of my inner life.
Right.
And once you do that, it makes sense sort of for me to say, okay, so now turn to them and say, shut up, until you get that duality, turn to who? Say that to who, but the more you can disembody, depersonalize all those things that come up inside you, Now you can start to control them.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, it does. It does. And I have to confess that when I think about who I am as a person, sometimes I think that I am wired in such a way that, man, I can't make that work because I don't have the patience.
You mean like the meditation?
Yeah. For instance, we were talking about, a thought pops up, and you just, I've never used that approach, and just basically said, all right, enough, go away, quiet. I just, that happens 2 or 3 times, and I said, okay, I'm done. I need to go do something else. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think that, I can see the huge benefit to that if you're exposed to that early, or it doesn't have to be early, but just at any time. I've not heard of that particular approach before. But that's something that I need to kind of investigate a little bit more, because there's still things that I do now. Here's a good example, not to get too off topic here, but I do a lot of chess puzzles, and I play a lot of chess against computers and stuff like that. And every time I make a stupid move, the computer just pounces on it and destroys me. And I'm saying, you idiot, why didn't you see that? Mm-hmm. And then all the different things they teach you about, improving your chess game and everything have a lot to do with being able to quiet those sorts of thoughts in your head and just focus on what's going on and that sort of thing. So,
exactly right.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. It's pretty neat. And I
when
especially
you were talking earlier, I'm sorry to interrupt. When you said I'm not very good at that, were you talking about the meditation?
Yeah. I think it's just because, like I said, I don't have the patience to do it. And if there's a way that I can overcome that, then I'm all ears, because I think that, I think it definitely could have benefited me, 10, 15, 20 years ago for sure. And probably now, obviously. But I get there and I have all these thoughts. They keep popping back into my head, and then it's, this is not working. And I go on and do something else.
Well, let me reframe that for you if I can. Do you want to?
Sure.
So one of the basic skills in our stuff is this no quiet skill, right? Which is just starting to observe when they come up and practice shutting them down. So if that's the skill, okay, I want you to rethink about what meditation is about. The goal with meditation, or at least for this kind of work we're talking about, is not to get to where you can just have your thoughts still all the time. Mm-hmm. The goal is to do that rep of saying no. That's where the strength comes from. It literally is like a mental gym rep.
Right.
I can't think of the metaphor right now, but the work, like I say, the work of it is observing it and exerting your will to say, no, quiet now. That's the work. Mm-hmm. And just like going to the gym, you do multiple reps. The fact that you're having to do it over and over is not a sign that you're not good at it or you're doing it wrong. That is the work.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Right? That makes sense. Yeah.
It's not like you want to go to the gym and the goal is to never have to pick the weight up. You go to the gym to do the work.
Right.
So it's the reframing of what the sitting is about. It's not the destination. It's an amplified opportunity to practice the cognitive control work that you need in the moment to moment of your day.
Right. Okay.
So it's not a sign of failure at all. It's just that the framing of what you're trying to do is not quite accurate.
Right. I'm with you. Yeah.
We actually have that in the program. So they start out with the observation, like I told you. Then they get into the skills. About 3 or 4 skills in, we have them do basically a sitting practice. We call it focused sitting, just because meditation has its own baggage to it, and we frame it that way. Look, you can gain all the mastery of your mental game you want with never doing the sitting work. Just like you can get faster with your sprints just by practicing that. Mm-hmm. But if you want to accelerate that work, go to the gym. If you want to accelerate your mental game progress, do the sitting practice, because it's just a purely focused opportunity to practice the basic skills, not just the skill, but all of it, the awareness, the will to do it. It's all right there.
Right. Okay. Tell you what, we're going to go ahead and take a short break. And when we return, David and I will continue our conversation around the techniques that he teaches in Raise Your Inner Game and how they might be able to be applied by athletes at the Naval Academy. Stay with us. Welcome back to Navy Sports Central, everyone. Carl Darden here with you, and I'm joined by David Levin, who is the author of the book Raise Your Inner Game, and David is also the founder of the Raise Your Inner Game Sports Academy. We've been spending some time talking about the different techniques that can be used for athletes to improve their inner game. David, in a minute, I'd like to get your thoughts on how some of these athletes at the Naval Academy might be able to employ your different techniques, especially when you consider all the different competing demands that they have to deal with. But first, I want to give you a chance to speak to what you guys do at the Raise Your Inner Game Sports Academy in a little bit more detail. Okay, so fire away.
Yeah, sure. The Sports Academy is mental performance training for high school and college athletes, basically, I think, teenage athletes. Mm-hmm. We offer it in a few different modalities, I guess. We do private coaching. We have group coaching, which is basically me just holding a virtual class. It basically happens in two phases. There's the first phase where they're learning the material, the basic insights we've been talking about, the skills, and that's a self-directed video course they take with some supervision and direction with me and whoever their coach is. And then we pivot to a 28-day challenge where they take what they've learned and they practice that every day for 4 weeks and track their progress in a workout journal. We also have a version of the course, the modality I talked about, where we train coaches to do the same exact work, but with their team. Honestly, my preference for the material is the coach training because there's a couple of reasons I think the material does the most good when it's a whole team at a time. But our primary audience in the last period has been to parents. Mm-hmm. Mostly because parents are in a position to make that decision. Right. And coaches, it's a more complicated decision for them and it's harder for them to get going. Mm-hmm. And then the third realm is there's some independent people who are coaches, but not with a certain team. They'll just work in their own community. So we can train people to be like an independent coach. We call them workshop leaders, where they go out and basically do exactly what I'm doing, but just in their own area, in their own sport. Right. And we don't do sport specific training. It's for everybody, but other kind of people obviously would be more likely to work in a particular sport just because they do that already. Mm-hmm. Everything people want to know is at raiseyourinnergame.com. The basic vision of the program, the specifics of the various offerings. We also have one really nice tool I'll let people know about. Anybody who is a parent or knows a teen who might be, interested in doing some work like that, boosting their mental game. We have an assessment we use. Mental game assessment. Yeah. That's a really great tool. It's the exact tool we use in our training. Mm-hmm. We'll do it before and after. Before, obviously, to get a kind of sense of where things really are now. It breaks the mental game into 10 distinct metrics and gives a number score for each of those. So you really have a sense of what specifically needs to be worked on and what's in a strength area they have already. And that's available for free. So if they want to go to the site, raiseyourinnergame.com, scroll down to the bottom. There's an area there. We have a whole starter kit with a bunch of resources for parents, but one of those is the assessment. So they could sign up for that starter kit. It's free. They can give the link to their child to do that assessment. And that's a really great tool to get things started.
All right, great. That sounds like an excellent resource. So now let's go ahead and get back into our conversation around how some of these techniques might be able to be used by the athletes themselves, not just for in the sports that they compete, but also outside of that, because I don't know how much of a chance you've had to research the typical life of a midshipman or anything like that. But I can tell you a couple of things. And one thought I've heard them share quite a bit is that when it comes to their day-to-day routine, when they go to their practices or when they're competing in their games, that's actually the easiest part of their day when you consider all the different things that they have to manage. So I'm curious to get your take on how the techniques that we've been discussing can help them deal with everything else outside of sports. And just to give you a little bit more context, the average Naval Academy athlete is carrying between 18 and 20 credit hours, depending on what their major is and what year they are. And it could be less than that if they knock off a class in summer school, but I don't know how frequent that is these days. In addition to that, they have military responsibilities. They have, like I said, a mandatory sports or other activity that they have to do when classes are over. Sometimes they are attending mandatory lectures at night, professional development lectures, that sort of thing. So they have a boatload of competing demands. Mm. And what I wanted to know was, based on that, obviously your techniques can help them excel in their particular sports, right? But is there a way to use these techniques to help them manage everything else that they have to deal with. Because to hear them, say, and I tend to agree with it. I mean, the athletic field or the pool or the tennis court or the basketball court, that's their sanctuary. That's where they go to escape, right? And it's the other aspects of their life as a midshipman that can weigh heavily on them. So can you speak to that a little bit in terms of how the techniques can be applied in those areas?
Well, that's actually one of the beauties, and it's not to be self-congratulatory, but it's one of the beauties of this approach. By the way, let me just, on the self-congratulatory note, to back out of that a little bit, it's not necessarily that we're the only ones who, have insight into this. I mean, again, we talked about the Galway book and all that. The big difference with our material and the kind of material that I think is the most helpful is that it's a mechanics-based approach. Earlier in our conversation, I don't remember exactly what we're talking about, but you said, I'd never really thought about just observing it, thinking about it in that way, the actual moment when you get distracted.
Right.
With the mental game normally, with other aspects of the game, the game itself, the sport itself, we coach specifics. We coach mechanics, right? If somebody's trying to make more free throws, we don't say to him, just make more free throws. We work on the mechanics, right? The position, the follow through, the set, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. You could almost say, if you're not working on the mechanics, it's not coaching, right? It's just, it's just telling them stuff. But with the mental game, we just tell them stuff. Mm-hmm. We just say, you got to focus more. Come on, you got to suck it up. You got to brush that off. You got to stay, and the athlete's like, yeah, I get that, but how? Right? Right. So this material, the whole conversation we had before, they start to learn to observe that what's really happening to cause them to lose their focus is that, just like with the meditation discussion, they're focused here. All of a sudden, a thought comes up and they get pulled off into it, right? Mm-hmm. That's the mechanics of their mental game. And once you break it down like that, you can now coach it. And they can get control of it in the same way they work on the other parts of the game. So I guess I got off onto that track to just say, it's not necessarily that ours is the only way to do this work, but the way to do this work in an effective way is to take a mechanics-based approach. So back to your question. One of the beauties of a mechanics-based approach is that it's not really about sports. Mm-hmm. These aren't really inherently sports skills. They are, and a psychologist will tell you this, they are the most fundamental life skills, success skills. So when you break it down, we've mentioned these three realms. There's the thoughts, there's the emotions, and there's the physical realm. So the ability to regulate in those areas, it's cognitive control, which is the thoughts, the attention. Mm-hmm. It's emotional self-regulation, which is obviously keeping emotions in check. And it's impulse control, which is managing those unconscious physical drives and appetites. Right. Those are the foundational skills. It turns out that they are also the perfect skills to help athletes with what they want help with to perform at their highest level. But it's also true that they're the same skills that help us with everything we struggle with in every area of our life. You think about, like when I first wrote this stuff, again, it was for people who I imagine were kind of doing what I do, which is I primarily creative work, a lot of writing, self-employed. In order to do my best work, I need to be able to block out the distractions and stay focused and be as creative and productive as I can possibly be. And the enemy of that is all the distractions in my life, right? I'm focusing on this idea. I'm trying to write this thing. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I wonder if I got an email, or I wonder what, thoughts come up. Mm-hmm. And the more I can block them and direct my attention, again, cognitive control, the more successful I'm going to be. I wrote it for people like that. I discovered later, that those same things are just exactly what athletes need too. So, all the struggles you talk about outside of sports for the Navy athletes, and really for all of us, the core of the struggle is the same. Are we able to manage our attention? Are we able to keep our emotions from knocking us off track? Are we able to regulate our appetites and impulses. Or like, for example, if we're sleepy, if we didn't get a good night's sleep last night and we're in a bad mood, right? Are we able to, is that just going to take over and we're going to be a jerk all day and we're going to not do good work? Or we're going to be able to say, just step back from that and say, no, I got it. I see that, but we're going to do something about it. That suite of self-regulation skills, it's universal. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely. So, when it comes to what you're seeing now and how athletes have managed their mental health in the past, versus, what's going on now, what's the one change you'd like to see moving forward with respect to managing their mental health and, by extension, being more successful in their inner game?
Yeah. It really ties into what I just rambled about 2 minutes ago. The main thing is to just have them learn how to do it. We're getting way better about talking about it and paying attention to it. We're still not great about what to do about it. We're still basically in the tell them what to do rather than actually show them how to do it. It's also kind of broken up into two kind of realms. So on the one end, with kind of, self-care kind of stuff, take care of yourself, get sleep, general self-care stuff. At the other end, there's therapy. You get to a point where there's a big enough issue. We all agree. We need to talk to somebody about it. There's not much in the middle. And so all of that work for the vast majority of athletes falls on them. I hear you say, Coach, I got to focus better. I don't know how to do that. I hear you say, folks, I got to shake it off if something goes wrong. I don't know how to do that. We're not telling them how to do it.
Right. Okay.
But once you can give them the mechanics and show them how to do that, there's just a ton of things they can do to make a real measurable difference in their happiness and their mental health. We just haven't given them the skills yet. So the main thing for me is to help as many kids as possible learn those basic inner skills, those self-regulation skills. And that's really what the Sports Academy is about.
Okay. All right. So now, what is the biggest obstacle that you think will potentially keep athletes from getting to that point?
Say more about the point you mean, being able to just get control of their mental game?
So, yeah, self-regulate, all that kind of thing, as it relates to the sports that they play, or even just managing their day-to-day lives. I'm asking this with a follow-up question coming, and I just want to get your thoughts on it.
Okay. The big barrier is not getting how it works. It's not getting what's really happening in there. Until we've examined it, until we have kind of gone through that process and had someone, crack the code for us, we just think it's all us. It's a mystery. Like I said, the coach says, suck it up. But what do you mean? How do I do that? Right? I know I need to stay positive, but something goes wrong and I get upset and I'm still upset. I don't know how to stop that. And so there's this downward spiral. Everyone around us, and by the way, our coaches, our parents are telling us we need to do better in these things. We don't need to be told. No one knows more about how their mental game is holding them back than the athlete themselves. Right.
Right.
But nobody's ever given them something to do about it, literally, at any level of their lives. Even, this kind of blows my mind too, but I hear more and more from athletes, at the elite level, the pros. And like just recently, I was hearing a guy he was an assistant coach with an NBA team. And when I pushed him a little bit for the specifics about the kind of mental performance work they did, he said, yeah, it basically comes down to watching films and having the maturity talk. Even at that level, they're still not giving them the tools, the knowledge and the tools. So it's the lack of knowledge. It's the lack of insight into what's actually happening, because until you know what's happening in your mental game, you can't do anything about it. It's just a big mystery.
Right.
And the downward spiral part is, and it's totally natural, but the natural conclusion to draw is, well, there's just something wrong with me. You yourself, you were talking about your meditation. Like, I just don't think I'm wired for it. I just don't think I have the patience for it. My perspective is absolutely not true. You just have a different sense of what the exercise is about. With the mental game, it's not true that somebody just doesn't have it. They just haven't learned how to do it yet. Now, of course, there is a spectrum. Some kids come up and they naturally have a strong mental game. They just intuitively have control over it for some reason. But that doesn't mean it's an innate skill.
Got it.
It absolutely can be learned. And I see this over and over and over and over. Honestly, I've yet to come across somebody who can't learn it. So that's the big barrier. They don't yet see how it actually works. Once you see it, it's surprisingly easy to get control of it.
Right. Okay. All right. So that really helped me, kind of put things in perspective. So I appreciate that. I did want to get your thoughts on one other subject though before we wrap things up, and that is when you consider all of the social media platforms out there that the young athletes take advantage of these days. Primarily, I would say that their platforms are mostly TikTok, Instagram, maybe Twitter to some extent, depending on how old they are. I think that's mostly for the college athletes. But you take into account that there is the opportunity for way more exposure and also way more scrutiny. So I'm curious to get your take on how you think those social media platforms impact an athlete's mental game.
Yeah, it's such an important question. It's going to depend a little bit on the age level we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think of it in two realms, by the way. One is, and this isn't just social media, this is just devices in general. The number one realm we talked about today was the mental, the thoughts, the attention control, right? Mm-hmm. Cognitive control is the technical term for that. That's more and more difficult now. Devices are training us to have less and less attention. So the one skill athletes most need to be at their best is the one that is most under threat by our modern world. And there's no hyperbole there. I mean, it's just absolutely true. We are being trained, our kids are being trained to have no attention. And it's the one thing they need more than anything else is to be able to shut down those distracting thoughts and focus and be present.
Got it.
And perform in the moment. So that's one big one for me, a concern for me. But there's also the social emotional side of it. So obviously this examined this comparative world with posting all your videos on there. It just adds another level of emotional difficulty. It adds a level of things that are, we said earlier, it's hard enough being a teenager without any of that. It's always been hard to be a teenager. Yeah. But it's harder now because the teenage years are when we are kind of starting to discover who we are as an individual. And when we add these artificial external metrics to that, it's just really hard. As far as it applies to our particular work, there's a term we use in the material that kind of just folds all these. We've been talking intellectual, emotional, physical, and the triggers and the way they pull us away from where we need to be. We lump all that at one point into just calling it gravity, an inner gravity, for a couple of reasons. One is to say that's what it does. It pulls us down. Just by definition, it pulls us away from where we can be. And the second super important part of it is to understand that it's never going to go away. Gravity doesn't go away. Physical gravity and inner gravity also doesn't go away. So just a quick little side thought on that. The goal with mental game development work is not to no longer get upset, no longer have distracting thoughts, no longer have physical things that are pulling at your attention. It's because it's just the way we're wired. It's just life. Do not measure your success by whether you're having those triggers in the first place. Your success comes when you learn to be able to recognize them quickly and rise above them, not let them control you. You manage them rather than the way around. So to this question of social media and the social emotional aspect of it, to me, it just adds another big component of inner gravity. Mm-hmm. It makes it that much harder. So a kid who's trying to learn to manage their emotions at game time, and just in their life in general, but at game time. So for a kid, maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the nature of the emotional thought they're having as they're getting up, ready to step out onto the court. What are people going to think of me? It used to be, a much more, a smaller universe.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
The kind of impressions they get, the kind of importance it has, all of a sudden now we've amplified that, many multiples. So the mechanism is still the same. They're still trying to be present and focused on doing what needs to be done in the moment. The nature of the pull working against them doing that it's getting harder and harder and harder. And social media is a huge piece of it.
All right. Yeah. Well said. Thank you. Okay, so David, I think that's going to do it for us today. I really appreciate you joining me to have this discussion. I can tell you that it was very, very educational, and I'm thinking that our audience, especially those, I have a lot of parents of athletes that are in my group, so I'm sure they're going to get a lot of benefit out of this. I just really appreciate you taking the time to share your experience with us.
Well, Carl, you're very welcome. I love talking about it. I enjoyed this conversation a lot. It really is the most important part. We don't talk about it as much as the other aspects of the game. But at least maybe it's just my perspective on it. But when you really get down to why we have kids in sports, now, again, by the time it's the Naval Academy, it's not just that. But it's just the most important part of our lives. As parents, we want our kids to thrive and be happy and be successful and discover what they're capable of, because the kids want that for themselves. And the one piece that affects that more than anything else is the mental game.
Yep.
And their ability to regulate that. And it comes under extra stress and pressure when they get into competition, but that's just an opportunity to do that work. So, it's just super exciting to have these conversations and have the opportunity to connect with parents who just want to really give their kids every opportunity.
Yeah, that is so true. All right. Thanks very much, David. You take care, and we'll be in touch, okay?
All right, man. Good talking to you.
Okay. Bye-bye. All right. Let's go ahead and take a quick breather. Coming up next, we have our question of the day and mid-watch segments. All right, we are back, and it is time for our question of the day. And as is our custom, we're going to go ahead and review the responses to the question from our last episode. So just to refresh your memory, here it is. Navy midfielder Eva Jovino currently leads the team in points with 48. If I were to set her year-end number for both goals and assists at 54.5, what would be your over and under prediction? So choice A was under on both, B, over on goals, under on assists, C, over on assists, under on goals, and D, over on both. And as I looked at these responses, they were pretty balanced across at least three of the choices. 37% of you think that Jovina will wind up the season being over on assists and under on goals. 31% of you went with over on both. 26% believe that she will be under on both. And finally, 6% predict that Jovina will be over on goals and under on assists. And just to give you an update, the Mids had a couple of big games recently, and Jovina has had a chance to add to her numbers. So through 9 games, she's got 36 assists and 21 goals for a total of 57 points. That puts her averages at 4 assists and 2.3 goals per game. If she holds on to those averages, she's projected to finish with 58 assists and 39 goals for a total of 97 points by the end of the regular season. And then it just comes down to how well the Mids compete in the Patriot League tournament. I think that Jovino can make it to 55 or more assists. Maybe she doesn't hit the number on goals, but the way she's playing, I don't think it's unreasonable to think that she can't bump up her assist average and wind up with 65 or more before the year is over. So even if she doesn't hit the over on goals, Jovino could still beat Kelly Larkin's 108 total points that she put up her freshman year. By the way, I'm not sure if you've seen the Mids play much this year, but I can tell you that Jovino doesn't need much of a window to get the ball on her teammates' sticks. If they make a cut and have him up ready to shoot, she'll get it there. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch how things play out the rest of the season. The women are playing with a lot of confidence after being battle-tested against some pretty tough non-conference opponents. So that should put them in a pretty good place when this young team takes on the likes of Loyola and Army. Now let's go ahead and get to this week's question, which deals with the mental game that we were talking about today in the deep dive segment. So here it is. Over the years, we've seen Mids with strong mental games perform at an extremely high level in their respective sports. Name one male and one female athlete who've had the confidence, resilience, and focus to consistently deliver when it counted at crunch time. You can reply on the Navy Sports Nation group Facebook page and put your answer in the comments section. Feel free to go into as much detail as you want. And just as a bonus, I'll give extra points to any of you who name athletes who are still competing at the Academy. So take some time to think on that and get back to me. I'm definitely looking forward to reading your responses. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and close this episode out with our mid-watch segment. And as you recall, we are following a couple of tennis players. On the women's side, we're tracking Emily Tannenbaum. Taking a look at her latest results, the Mids took on UConn, and she won her singles match 6-2 and 6-4 to help the Mids nail down that 5-2 victory. Against South Dakota, she won her doubles match 6-4, as well as her singles 6-2 and 6-1. This was part of a 3-match series down in Orlando, Florida, against Yukon, South Dakota, and Niagara. The mids won all 3 matches. In fact, Tannenbaum didn't even play against Niagara. So overall on the year, she's got a 22-9 singles record, and she is 18-8 in doubles. By the way, Patriot League play starts this weekend against Lehigh. Moving on to men's tennis, we're tracking Luke Garner. The mids were out in California for some matches a couple of weeks ago, and unfortunately didn't come away with any wins. They dropped 3 matches. But specifically focusing on Luke, he won his doubles match versus Loyola Marymount 6-3, but the team didn't get the doubles point because they lost the other 2 doubles matches. I think I may have mentioned this before, but the way they score doubles in college tennis is you have 3 doubles matches. They just play 1 set apiece, and whichever team wins 2 out of the 3 sets gets the point. Now, a couple of days later, the mids played Point Loma, and Luke also won his doubles match there, but ended up losing in a tight singles match. So overall, it was kind of a rough West Coast trip for the mids, but they'll look to get back on track when they go up against Boston University, which kicks off their Patriot League schedule as well. That's going to do it for this edition of Navy Sports Central. Thank you all so much for joining us. Now, if you like what you've heard, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and remember to spread the word to all the other Navy fans out there. Once again, I'd like to thank my guest, David Levin, for spending some time with us to talk about how athletes can raise their inner game. I don't know about you guys, but I learned quite a bit. We have been getting a great response to our question of the day, so if you want to jump in on that, just go to the Navy Sports Nation group Facebook page. I will go ahead and pin it to the top so you won't miss it. And just a quick reminder, the views expressed on Navy Sports Central are my own and do not reflect those of the U.S. Naval Academy or Navy Athletics. By the way, the music used in Navy Sports Central comes to you courtesy of Audio Jungle. This is a great site for purchasing the rights to use music from thousands of artists around the world, and those we feature in the podcast will be credited in our show notes. Talk to you soon, everybody. Until next time, this is Carl Darden. Go Navy, beat Army.